welcome. If you don't know me, I'm Kerrin, or KG as I'm known around the place. I've been with Betfair for about 4.5 years now, and I'm responsible for our automated community within Australia and New Zealand. So basically my remit is to help engage people with automation and modelling on the exchange. And probably the thing I enjoy most about that role is this community and encouraging people to come together to share their learnings, their experiences, their challenges, so that we can all benefit from that learning and we don't keep having to start from scratch. Why do we invest in this as Betfair? So Betfair, our mission is to create more winners. And from a very selfish perspective, we win when you win, particularly within our Australian, New Zealand customer base. So it is in our best interest to help you guys be better at what you do. And personally, that's the part I love most about my job. So yeah, it's great to have the opportunity to help foster and facilitate that. Through the evening, we will have the Q&A box open at the bottom of the screen. So as you have questions that you want to ask Bruno, please drop it in there. If you want to have a conversation, we'll have the chat feature off here just because it doesn't flow very well. But if you're keen to get involved, there's a really thriving Betfair Quants Slack community. If you're not over there, I suggest you join. Ben will drop a link in the chat below so that you can join if you're keen to, and head across to the meetups channel there, and we'll see you over there. So meetups tonight, our focus is on Greyhound racing. So this is in part to support our fast track API sort of collaboration that we've got going at the moment, helping people to get access to that form data. So we thought we'd have the focus of the meetup on Greyhound modelling this time around because of that. And I was incredibly grateful that Bruno was happy to put his hand up to come and share his experiences over quite a long period of time, working on the exchange in a number of different capacities. So he's very, very open and vocal within the Slack community, sharing his learnings, his experiences, his ups and downs. He's really transparent about that, which I'm really grateful for. So I couldn't think of anyone better to have to share their learnings than him tonight. So if you're interested in Greyhound modelling, Greyhound automation, starting point, go and take a look at the Automation Hub. There's a tutorial on there on using the Fast Track API. Ben will send a link. It's got a link to the recording of last month's workshop as well, if you want to have a look through there. So yeah, suggest you have a look. Otherwise, reach out. As always, my last comment before I welcome Bruno is to say, if we can help along the way, reach out to us. And that equally applies to anyone who's watching the YouTube recording later who is interested in the Slack link and obviously can't see the link below. Drop us a mail, automation@betfair.com.au, and that's me and Ben, and we'll help you where we can along the way. But without further ado, Ben, can we have Bruno on camera, please? So Bruno has primarily a dev background, though he's probably better known for his modelling within the community. Thank you very much for joining us. You're in Brisbane at the moment instead of...
Yes, I'm in Brisbane, yeah. Usually, yes, I'm based in Sydney, but I was traveling for a couple of months.
Very
so
jealous.
In Brisbane. Yes, I just see. Yeah, so stuck in Brisbane at the moment because I have to drive back to Sydney at some point, but not really looking forward to it at the moment.
No, probably not. Anyway, before we get structure tonight, you've got a little bit of a journey to share with us before we jump into sort of a wider Q&A. But before that, can you share a bit of your history, your background? Who are you, where you come from? What were you pre-Betfair?
So I got background coming from France, actually. You can pick it up from
the
accent. Yeah. I've been living in Australia for 13 years, based in Sydney. My background is Java developer, and then moved into different software engineering position, Ruby on Rails, Python, a bit of DevOps, cloud, machine learning. different stuff actually. And then I've been working with integrating with the Betfair API for over 10 years. So it's been quite a long time, and mainly working on the Greyhound trading systems, and just for fun initially.
Just for fun initially, but then probably a little bit more seriously along the way.
Yeah, at some point, yes. But there's been some up and down, so happy to talk about that actually.
Cool. But you would say yourself that you are coming from more of a dev background than a modeling background, right? You've got modeling skills, but that's not
something
fundamentally
I learned actually on the way. Yes.
Yeah. Which is interesting, I think, for a lot of people sort of, watching that it is a pathway that you can take. You don't need to be a, hardline data scientist to be able to build decent models.
Absolutely, yes. And also, I didn't know much about racing either when I started.
I'm not sure you still know a lot, Bruno.
I still don't know much, but I can do some modeling.
Yeah, which I think is also...
it compensates, yes.
Yeah, which I think is also a really good shout that, a lot of people don't model racing because they don't know anything about it. And that, I think you're the perfect example. That shouldn't be a reason not to look at the data, because there is enough data out there that, as long as you take the right approach, you can end up in a pretty good place, even if you don't know one end of a dog from another. Or, as one of our data scientists asked me once for racing, what's the rail? Went on to build some very good models. So, you don't need to know it all to necessarily be able to do it well. So anyway, do you want to share your screen? Because I know you've got a bit of a prezzo as the base of what we're going through. Here's one we prepared earlier. Okay, so I'll leave it with you, and I will butt in because I do. But
cool. Okay, so let's start. So thanks for joining that presentation, and this is going to be about Greyhound modeling, as Kerrin has explained. So first I wanted to talk a bit more about when I started doing some work on the Greyhound. So that was back in 2010, and it was a bit of a random pick actually. As a Java developer, I wanted to create an application integrating with the web services. And one of the web services available on the internet was a Betfair API. And back in the days, there was a SOAP API, which is not really good today, but that was 10 years ago. And that was probably the most modern and most robust one on the market at the time. So what I've done is to create my own trading system for the Greyhound in Java, building a trading system, so collecting race results, race cards from different websites, doing the HTML scraping, putting that in database, having my own engine to fetch the odds in real time, place bets, monitor the bet status as well, and generate reports in the end. For the predictions, everything was done using SQL queries in a MySQL database. The thing with these kind of systems is actually quite slow because everything was manual. There was no machine learning involved doing that. So it was a lot of fine tuning of the request every time I wanted to update the predictions, and was taking about two days really to generate probabilities for 1 year of racing. It was a very slow feedback loop. And another thing that didn't exist back in the day was a Betfair start price, which is a very good metric today if you want to backtest a system.
Particularly on Greys, that took a while to get in on Greyhound.
Yes. So today I've got something which is a bit more modern, using the latest machine learning tools available on the market. So it's using a lot of Python, Jupyter notebooks, which are very convenient to test scripts, visualize the data, and also using Keras and TensorFlow for the neural networks and deep learning, and also using GPUs, which make a massive difference in terms of time used to train models. I think using GPUs, I could reduce the time to train a model by 10 to 12 folds, which is it's massive.
Unbelievable.
Also now you have a lot of libraries integrating with Betfair, like the Betfair Lightweight Client or Flumin. So you don't have to implement your own trading system. You can actually use these frameworks that will connect the Betfair APIs automatically, fetch markets, monitor events, and trigger actions based on the schedule, or maybe a few minutes or seconds before the start time of a market. Also, you have access to a lot of machine learning articles, code samples. There is a very active data scientist community, and people are happy to share stuff, and it's constantly evolving. And also the data is a bit more accessible today. So we've got the Fast Track API, for instance. The Betfair API has been revamped a few years ago. Now it's all JSON. If I remember correctly, you've got a lot of different APIs. It's quite robust. And you have access to data like the Betfair start price, and you've got access to historical data. You can even replay odds using some of the Python libraries. I put a few links in the presentation that I think will be shared later, so don't worry about them for now. So the question around Greyhound is, how do we generate probabilities? So if you look at the form, for instance, so that's coming from the Fast Track report. When you go to the website, they generate a PDF with the form and the predictions. So the form will be that things that I highlighted in purple here. We've got the last X races for a dog. And the question is, how do you come up with a number like $3.20? And what does it mean? So when you work on the trading system, you want to generate your own probability. So you know if you can beat the market, or if you want to place bets on Betfair because you think you know better than the market. So the first way to generate probabilities is to use simple ratings. It's probably where almost everyone started from, where you come up with a very simple formula and you aggregate the results from the form for the dogs, and you come up with your final number. And there is no machine learning involved. So for example, you can take the form for the dogs and you take the last 5 races, and you give points for the results of the dog. So if the dog was first, you give it 5 points. If it's second, 3 points. If it's third, 1 point. You will sum the points for all the dogs and come up with a rating, and then divide by the total sum of all the dogs just to normalize the results. And that will give you some kind of probabilities. This is not awesome, but it's better than random, usually. If not, find a different hobby. So then the next approach, so using machine learning, a quite common approach is to use logistic regression, which is basically a way to give a probability to an event occurring, like a dog winning or losing a race. There are many libraries existing to do that, I think mostly in Java, Python, and in R, which will be the most common ones. So you don't have to implement it yourself. It's well documented as well, with a bunch of examples for all of them. And it's widely used in machine learning for classification problems. Also, it uses the log loss function, which I'm going to talk a bit more about later. So I wanted to mention that, which is a way to calculate the cost for the, so when your model comes up with a probability of an event occurring, like if you say this dog has 40% chances of winning the race, and it actually happens, it's a function that will calculate a cost for the 40% probability that you get to the dog to win. So in terms of logistic regression, how it works from a high-level perspective, someone will create different features. So let's say I come up with feature A, B, and C. I will feed that into my logistic regression model. It will try to reduce the cost function, so using the log loss function, and apply a sigmoid function at the end that will give an output between 0 and 1 that will become a probability, and that I can use in the end to calculate the probability for each dog of winning a race.
When we talk about log loss, for anyone here who just taking back to that one, anyone here who isn't familiar with that, and I see a few of the names on here who might be a little bit fresh to that sort of more semi-data science approach, an easy way of, a simple way of thinking about that is if you say that something's really likely to happen, so you go, this is a $1.20 shot to win, and it wins, so what? That's not particularly impressive. If you, and the market thinks that it's equally, $1.20 shot to win, that's not particularly impressive. Whereas if you say it's a $1.20 shot to win and it loses, you should be penalised more heavily, right? Than if it wins. So I suppose that's the sort of it's putting that weighting on the difference between your probability and the outcome. Yeah.
Yeah. I think I prefer your explanation.
You put
Thanks for clarifying for me.
5 datathons under my belt. First time round, I had to Google it. So that's my shorthand. Cool. Keep going.
So a way to improve how to improve your model when using logistic regression is to come up with better features. So working on features is something you have to do all the time, improve them, so your model will have better performances in them. And the next approach for generating probabilities is deep learning, which is quite advanced, and it's what I've been using lately. Using modern machine learning techniques, relying on neural networks. With neural networks, you can do some automatic features extraction based on raw data. And there are many frameworks available on the market like TensorFlow, PyTorch, Keras, MXNet, and a few others. With this approach, you can actually build quite complex models, and it's highly customizable. So you don't necessarily have to use a log loss cost function, for instance. You can customize something and come up with your own formula you want to apply. You can work on a different architecture for the model as well. You can go crazy with inputs and combine things in very different ways. So it's very powerful. So the way it works from a high-level perspective as well, so you can come up with the raw data that you get from previous past results for the dogs. You can compute your own features as well, or you can use output from other model that we call model chaining. You can feed that into your neural network, and the neural network will try to reduce the cost function in the same way as logistic regression and come up with probabilities. And because the neural network architecture has to be designed manually and it's quite complex, there is quite a steep learning curve. So you have to take that into account.
It's a big step, right? To go from like a linear approach to ML to deep learning.
Yeah, and there are new things coming up every 6 months. There is always something new. So you have to keep learning all the time and apply newer techniques. And
how just in terms of that learning, like, where did you're not from a data science background? What was your into it? Was that simply reading, Kaggle articles, looking on, towards data science? Like, was it just reading what was produced, or like, how did you get across? Because once you're there, keeping up with it isn't that hard, but getting there.
Yeah, it's quite hard at the beginning. So it's easy when you start from a Hello World application, and yeah, you have a lot of examples where you just feed some images into the model to identify if it's a cat or a dog on the picture. But I was a bit tired of doing always the same thing, and I thought I want something a bit more challenging, and that's why I thought applying this to racing would be actually a bit more challenging.
So effectively, this was where you learned it. Is that right?
Yes, exactly. Cool. Yes.
So for those out there who are interested in this and sort of at the beginning of their modeling journey, would you say this is a decent learning environment? Like, gives you motivation, right? That definitely helps.
Absolutely, yes. And it's fun as well.
Yeah, that definitely helps. Like, yeah, I've had this conversation with lots of people, like, people go, oh, should I jump online and do XYZ course? And it's like, well, you're probably not going to get a lot out of that if you're not super passionate about it. Whereas finding a way to apply it to something that you do care about, i.e. this, even if it's just working through, some of the tutorials we've got up there, like, at least it's relevant to what you're interested in. No, it's good that it worked for you. That's really, Really good to know. Sorry, go back neural networks. Sorry, interrupted.
Not all good. Yeah, that's it for this slide. So next thing is to talk about feature engineering, because that's something we talk about quite often on the Slack channel. So feature engineering is a process of using domain knowledge to extract features from the raw data. And that's where people have to use their brain and knowledge of racing or sports in general to come up with features which will be better than what other people in the market can produce. Some common features that we find are the Bayer speed figure, for instance. You can find the formula explained on different websites. Basically, you will compare a time for each track with the actual time for a runner and give that a rating. Then you've got to the ratings like ELO, True Skill, Glico, and I came across a couple of other ones recently, but I cannot remember the names. So someone can actually use these common ratings or common features and add their own to the mix and use that as an input for logistic regression or neural networks.
And this is probably one of the tricky bits, right? If you're coming to it and not knowing what you're modeling. So, you know, as we said, the example earlier of not knowing what the rail was, how did you go about deciding what features? Was this something that, again, you know, evolved over time as you got to know your data set better? And was it simply starting with, okay, well, these look like the obvious things? How did you start?
You have to start with what is obvious.
Start somewhere.
It's that simple. Yeah, what is obvious? So when you want to give a rating to a dog, you check its form and you check the past results. And what is important is the placing of the dog and the time. And after that, everything that you use on top is really for fine tuning. So yeah, start with something very simple, something basic. Usually it's what works the best. So probably, I would say the most basic features will give you 80% of the performance of the model.
Oh,
and everything rule, on time. Right? Yeah, it's always a 20-80 rule.
And then the rest of it, it really is, like, there's no magic to it, is it? It's just the process of trial and error and finding what fits better, yes. Right? Is that fair?
Yes. Yeah, that's true, yes. It's a lot of trying different things. And yeah, I would say that 90% of the time I would roll back and go back to the previous version of the model because it didn't work.
Back up, that didn't help.
But that's how it is, yeah. It's very time consuming to generate your own features, but that's, I guess, what the fun is.
And it's where you spend a lot of your time still, isn't it? Like in terms of creating and improving models, it's on that feature generation.
Yes, a lot of time spent on features and with deep learning, tweaking models as well.
Nice. Right, back to you.
Cool. So I wanted to give an example of feature engineering. So for instance, this is coming from an actual form of a dog from last week. I wanted to give an example of creating my own feature. So I want to create a feature based on the time of the dog compared to the best of night. And so
sorry, so best of night being the runner at the track, the fastest runner at the track, or?
Yeah, it's for the day, the best time for the track and distance.
Cool, yeah, just check.
Yes. So I come up with a formula a bit random, which is 1 divided by 1 plus the time minus best of night. I calculate that for every entry in the race result. Come with a rating, which is the last column from the table. And at the end, because I want to compress that into features, so aggregate with the list of rating, I can use different aggregation methods, like get the sum, the average, standard deviation, maximum, but you can also get the median, 75th percentile. You can do weighted averages, whatever you want. It's really a mix and match. So based on the different attributes that you get from the raw data, you will generate your list of features. And because it's very easy to generate features, you can come to the point where you have too many features. So that's what we call actually feature explosion. Which is an actual term in machine learning. Feature explosion is when you have too many features and some of them are quite redundant. So if I want to create, maybe I can create 200 features based on the actual time of the runner. But if they have the same distribution, that will bring the same value to the model, and it's redundant. So
it's just white noise, isn't it? It's just
static noise,
fuzziness. Yeah, static. That's the word I was looking for.
Exactly. Yeah. Yes. So there are different ways to work around that. First, you can use correlation matrices for the features that will find highly correlated features. So you can discard them and keep only a subset of them. And then there are some techniques as well to estimate the feature importance using GBM, so gradient boosted machine or random forest. And that will actually train a model using all the features and give you the one that contributes the most to the weight applied to the internals of the model. Next slide, I wanted to talk a bit about the market, Greyhound market over the years, because it has evolved quite a lot. So I've collected Betfair start price since 2014 for Australia and UK. And we can see that over time, the strike rate has improved on Betfair. And I think that's coming with machine learning. It's mostly around 2018, we can see the strike rate going up. And that's where machine learning became a thing. So about 3 years ago. And we had more and more people doing what we are doing today. And I think this is driving the market to be a bit sharper. So interestingly, the log loss function applied to BSP hasn't changed much for AU, but the strike rate is going up. And it's been going from 0.39 to 0.42. So 42% strike rate is what we had over the past 12 months.
Interesting. Like when other people track BSP.
Same thing happened for UK. The strike rate went from 31% to almost 33%. And there was an increase in strike rate in 2018 mainly, and now it's stabilized.
Very interesting. Cool. I like looking at it that way.
So
I wonder how much
for us.
Yeah, I wonder how much things like field sizes and so on play. I know that when they decreased field sizes, that impacted things like the reliability of BSP for a bit. So interesting to see some of those correlations and where the impact comes from what.
Yeah. So the key takeaways are that the market is becoming sharper. So people have to continuously improve their models if they want to still have them to be profitable. How to improve your models is to improve the quality of the data that is captured and improve the feature sets as well by generating better features. Also diversifying and not just work with a win market, but also place markets, head-to-head and exotics. I know Betfair is trying to improve the offering in that space, coming with more markets. And most importantly, keep learning and have fun.
I like that. How much success have you found in taking your approach and going from primarily win betting to looking at the plays, the heads-to-heads, exactas, those other market types? Because some people go atrociously at that it doesn't translate very well. And I'm still not sure why some people's modelling approaches do better than others in terms of translation. But how have you gone with it?
Actually, I'm still only working on win markets, so I'm collecting data for place markets, and that's probably the next thing on my to-do list, is to look at place market and see if I can find an edge and place some bets in that space.
Yeah, we'll watch this space.
Yeah.
My question for you, so it's one I ask a lot, but and lots of people have different answers. So for you, how often do you review a model compared to tweaking what you've already got versus working on new things? And when does variance become what you think is an actual statistically significant change? I know you've heard me discuss this with other people before, but what's your take on I guess those two things?
Yeah. Um, so when I analyze the results from a model, usually I take 4 weeks of data into account. So what I do when I train a model, so I have my training data set, a validation data set, to make sure I've got pretty much the same results in validation. And then I can backtest my model or previous versions of the model actually on new data. So what I do is every month I will generate a data set for the month and backtest the previous model on that one to make sure I have the same predictions and the same PNL as when it was running live. And if I have the same results, I can train or retrain the model using the next month of data to make sure it's up to date.
So basically you've got a monthly cycle that you work to.
Yes, correct, yeah. So we
and if you
train the
had,
model every month.
And even if you were going at, if your model over a month, some months will be down. You manage to have remarkably few
Absolutely.
that are down, but some months will be down statistically. At which point are you concerned that your model doesn't have the edge that it once did, something changed in the market, something changed in your data source, or whatever? At which point do you feel you need to go back to the drawing board and go, oh, actually I might need to change something?
Actually, all the time.
so you're fairly quick to change, or
sometimes probably a bit too quick.
That's a good
when
answer.
I look at the PNL, it's never high enough. I've got the feeling that it can be improved all the time, even if it's positive. And that's why we spend always time trying to improve things.
Oh, no, at least you're honest. Do you want to, this is your last screen, isn't it?
I've got a few questions that I have from Slack, actually. So I can go quickly through that.
Yeah,
maybe answer it for some of them. How many models are you running? So I've got one for Australia and New Zealand and one for UK, mainly because Greyhound racing in Australia, New Zealand and UK is completely different. You don't have the same number of runners. Grading rules are totally different as well. So I cannot have one model doing everything. Some people suggest splitting Australia and New Zealand, but I found out that it's better to train the same model on a larger data set, especially for New Zealand, than having two different models. Why do you think your back profit is performing so much better than your late profit? That changes based on the models that I'm using, but that comes down to calibration. So when you generate your probabilities, sometimes your model is not well calibrated, so you could be over evaluating short prices. So let's say you estimate a dog to have a price of 1.5, but the actual orders real odd would be maybe 1.4, meaning you have to recalibrate your model to be closer to 1.4 than 1.5. Usually, if you have if your model is skewed this way, so you have a tendency to maybe combine your probabilities toward the center instead of spreading them out. So calibration is supposed to work around that, but there is no perfect formula, or I haven't found it yet, so it's never perfect.
Do you think the other element there, Bruno, might be not necessarily instead of, but possibly as well as an element of bet execution, that maybe your back execution and impact on the market is interacting in a different way than your lay one? That possibly that might also be impacting that skew. Just a thought. More people might be prepared to lay at a certain price point. I don't know, but just another thought.
Yeah, betting strategy is something quite important as well, because not everyone will back and lay at the same prices as well. So you may end up placing more back bets and lay bets. So you may have a higher net volume on back, for instance, or higher net PNL, just because you place more bets.
Yeah, no, I think it's very fair. I think that's where it goes from. You and I could take the same model and end up with very, very different P&L trends, because the model's just the starting point, right? It's then how you bet your model. which, yeah, and it's hard to draw a really clear line between when one finishes and the next one starts, but
Yeah,
definitely
true.
need to consider both, right?
Yes. Next one, have you seen turnover in the Greyhounds evolve over the last year? And how do you think it will evolve going forward? I don't know. It's not something that I have monitored, to be honest. I don't know if you have
I
some
can speak
views.
to
Yeah.
about 150% growth year on year on greyhound markets in Australia. So they've been trending very, very well, very healthily, and pretty steady trend over the last 12 months, which is really, really good to see. They're some of our most healthy markets and healthy in terms of like the trend line, and that they continue to grow. So we really like that. And I've had a few people come to me and go, you know, I tried to bet greyhound markets a few years ago and there was no money there. And now off the back of, you know, some of the initiatives we've run recently, you know, I've come in and I've tried it and it's there and it's different and I can get in now. So very different than it used to be.
Cool.
I like this next one. Why greys? Why did you start with greys instead of horses? So the field size, that's normally the first answer.
Yeah, honestly, it was a random pick. Yeah. Yeah, I wanted to work on a system, automated betting system, and I thought about maybe horse racing. But yeah, that's true that having many more horses than dogs in a race make it a bit more complex. But I thought also with dogs, there is that bit of randomness that you don't have with horse racing.
I.e., there's no human interaction the same way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It can be crazy and it's hard to predict exactly what's going to happen. And I think it's a bit more interesting.
You're nuts. You just like a challenge. Yeah. Any plans to branch out?
Yeah, has been on the cards for some time. I just need to find more time to get to that point here. As I said, I have very long to-do list.
No comment.
How much time spent on the feature
selection?
Probably 60% of the time, I would say. It's a lot of time collecting data and making sure it's valid, cleansing the data, and checking the quality of the data. Modeling is probably 20% of the time with deep learning. Yeah, a lot of time on feature selection.
I've got another question that's really related to this from the Q&A, so I might ask that at the same time. Ballpark, how many features does your current primary model have, and how long does that take to train? So we're talking about a dozen, 2 dozen, 50. How many features are we? Ballpark.
Probably somewhere around 250 features.
Okay. It's a fair ballpark.
Yeah.
And, you know, once upon a time you said that it took, you know, 2 days to train something, or what about these days?
So what takes a lot of time for me is to generate a data set, because that will compile the features, pre-compile everything, and put that in a CSV format. And then I can use that to train the model. So I can tweak the model architecture using the same data input. Training a model will take maybe 15 to 20 minutes using GPUs. So I can iterate quite a lot, train different model architecture.
So key takeaway from this session, anyone who isn't using a GPU for their modeling endeavors,
do it.
Get on it.
Yeah.
So you said 10 to 12 times.
Yeah.
No, that's very, very good. So, okay, this or that, which is more important to you? Feature generation or modeling technique?
Probably feature generation. Because today I'm using deep learning, but if you use logistic regression, what is most important here is really the quality of the features. I wouldn't recommend someone who hasn't done a lot of machine learning to go with neural networks, because it's very complex and you really need to understand how it works under the hood.
Don't start there.
Yeah. Start simple.
Ending point, not starting point.
Yeah.
Start with something you can plot.
Exactly. So, yeah. It's easier to fine-tune a model with logistic regression.
But it's also easier to visualize, right? Like people talk about modeling, and you know there are lots of terms, lots of words thrown around. But at the end of the day, you know, starting with like logistical regression. You know, regression, you can draw a trend line, right?
Yes.
You know, and being able to visualize things, to plot things. When you talked about correlation clusters earlier, basically we're going put dots on a line and see, you know, on a plot and see if they sit together. You know, things that you can visualize make the learning curve easier, right? Particularly if you're new to this. Whereas when you get down the trend of, you know, deep learning, machine learning, neural networks, it all gets a little, it's a black box, yeah? You put things in, you get something out, you don't get to see much of what's in the middle.
And it's very hard to debug, actually. I had a few examples where my model is totally wrong, but I have no clue why.
Why? Yeah.
It's completely off and it's impossible to debug. So, okay. So.
Another good reason to start with things where you can see and you can hypothesize and test a little better. So no, I like that very much. Okay, so I was going to ask you this one. So I'm glad that these are courtesy of Paul as much as anything. Do you use any odds or price movements in your models? I.e., you know, I guess two questions there. One, are you using like historical pricing data in generating your price? I suppose the second one is, are you considering current market prices and you know, factoring that in?
So yeah, for the first question, yes, I use historical BSPs as part of my features.
As a feature?
But I don't use a live odds to generate my prediction, because actually I'm competing with the market prediction, so I don't want to take that into account. So I can generate my probabilities a couple of days before the actual race, and the probabilities won't change.
So that's one of the questions here was asking, you know, how far out can you do that? So basically you're going, as soon as you have their previous run and the form, you could generate a price, right?
Exactly, yeah.
Do you, and obviously in any of this, share as little or as much as you're comfortable to, but do you compare your price against the market for a bit of a sense check when it comes to execution? I know some people sort of have a buffer of where they're comfortable and going, okay, well, if I'm within, you know, this much of the market price, then it's fine. But if I'm here and the market price is here, obviously I've missed something. Do you consider that, or do you just go, well, that's part of the wash?
Maybe I should do it, but I don't. So yeah.
I like your line, so I'm not going to argue with you.
Completely off, or just place bets, whatever.
I'm not going to argue with you. Staking is so tricky, and we could spend 2 hours talking about staking and staking strategies. But high level, do you use a Kelly stake approach, or are you looking at like flat staking or to win X, to lose X? Ballpark, what's your
I only do
take?
flat stakes. It's been 10 years doing flat stakes. Something I will probably update at some point, especially when scaling bets. But so far, flat stakes have been working for me.
That's very interesting, and it's another one where there's so much variance in what people do, and so many people have very successful outcomes on very different approaches. So, very interesting. That's your take. I'm going to come back to this one in a second. No, let's go through the last couple. That's right. Underlying thought process when you are creating or modifying a model. I mean, you've shared a lot of that anyway. Is there anything else you'd add that you haven't already gone through?
No, most of the time it's waking up to a new idea, thinking, oh, I know how I can improve my predictions, and spend time working on that and realize a couple of weeks later that it was a bad idea.
You should go back to the previous one and get rollback. Yeah, exactly. I think it's most of us, right?
Most seriously, actually, a good starting point is to check from the Fast Track website. They come up with tips, so you can check actually what they say. They come up with some good analysis most of the time.
You're saying that's a decent sense check.
Yeah, exactly. And you can try to identify trends from what they say, check your data, see if whatever they say is actually backed by some data that you can find, some trend, and then you can generate a feature based on that. That's
a nice little insight. Thank you. You're very kind. A couple more here from Paul before we go to I've got a screen of them here as well that are coming in. Without giving away anything, but high level, what would you say some of the most important areas to look at in terms of race prediction for greyhounds are? I mean, you've already done a fair amount of giving away this evening. You know, looking at previous times, win loss, all those basics. But also, as you said, looking at form, fast track analysis and tips. Is there anything else you'd highlight or sort of stick with those?
Yeah, most important is the place of the dog and the time. There are different ways to normalize the time of the dog. So compared to the best of night is a good thing. You also have to come up with reference time per track and distance and use that as the reference and then compare the actual time to that reference time. And that's probably the most important thing.
Very kind of you. And final one there, are there any particular resources that you would link? I mean, you've shared a couple this evening, but any other resources that sort of spring to mind, particularly in terms of Greyhound modelling?
Probably compile a list of links somewhere. I can put that on Slack as well.
Oh, you're a good one. Thank you.
Yeah, it's probably quite a lot. So I don't know where to start.
All right, I'll let you think about that and I'll come back to it. We can probably stop sharing this so we can see you a bit more. I have an absolute screen here and not very long, so I'm going to jump through a couple of these. So this is interesting. Ballpark, what's the difference between your backtesting ROI and live ROI? Do you see a big fluctuation between those two numbers?
There is actually. The ROI when backtesting is always a bit higher, and I don't really know why. Maybe by a couple of percent. So that's something I take into account when I evaluate a model, knowing that it's a bit optimistic, the results that I get. But it's and if you were time when you live test it and compare the results that you come to that conclusion.
That was where you're like, if it's outside of that realm of what you consider to be your margin, that's when you start worrying, right?
Exactly, yes.
The reality isn't following the model anymore.
Yeah.
I like this one. Gugave always has good questions. Do you have a particular favoured historical edge? So something that might not be an edge now, so it's not necessarily giving anything away, but like, so something that might have been particularly simple or counterintuitive that actually worked. There was someone who for a long time, just laid everything on 101 and actually managed to, make a thing on that. Is there an equivalent of that has played out historically?
Trying to think.
It's hard because I know you've had a lot of different things you've played over the years.
Not in the recent days, yeah. Maybe I had stuff like that 10 years ago, but cannot remember any of it.
No, fair call. This is a very interesting one. So how do you deal with different field sizes in Australian racing? The extension of this is, do you train different model objects or padding runner records, or is there a different...
where do I start?
Ouch.
I think, yeah.
Easier said than
for
done.
A couple of days on this one. So actually I have one model.
I started in the UK with my Greyhound modelling. I'm like, these field sizes are much more reliable than Australia.
So even if there are some boxes with scratch runners or empty boxes, I still use the same model, but I take into account if there are empty boxes, and the model should learn from that, because when you have a box which is empty, you can see that the probability of winning for the dogs around that box, that empty box, are a bit higher. So it's something you need to take into account in your model. Training different models for that, I don't think we'll have enough data if you consider only races with 7 runners or 6 runners in Australia. I don't think we'll have a data set large enough to train a model properly.
That's a fair call. Yeah, and some good suggestions how to actually deal with the issue too. It's an interesting one, and I think people find the answer interesting. What would the percentage of races your model bets on be on any given day in Australian Greyhound racing?
Percentage of races?
Yeah. If we offer 100 races, how many of them are you likely to bet on?
100.
One of the things I love about your models.
Yeah. It would just bet stupidly on everything. So I don't filter out anything.
I'm not sure you can say stupidly on everything when you have a trend line that looks like yours, but I think the rest of us to shame.
Touche.
But I think that's a really good takeaway too, that like part of what you've developed, right, is something that has a fairly conservative, percentage return, but it's consistent, right? And if you can do that on lots of different races, 100 races a day, give or take in Australia, that's significant, right?
It is, yes. And it's Australia
So,
plus UK. So yeah, it's a system that will run 24/7. So yeah, it's quite a lot of betting opportunities.
I like that. Going back to the staking conversation we had earlier, do you think that your approach of flat stakes contributes to why you're more comfortable disregarding the market because you're a little bit more, I guess, not price agnostic, but you're not caring what you're getting on at the same way because you're flat staking? Do you think that might contribute?
Could be, yes, actually. That's a good point because I don't need to think too much about the odds or the liability of a bet, actually.
Yeah.
There is no overthinking behind it. Yeah, whatever the price is, I will put the same amount of
Just go with it.
Yeah.
That's a decent consideration. Interesting one. How do you benchmark your sub models and main models for then future improvement and or against changes in data?
Good question. So for most of them, so I have some sub models. For instance, I have a model which is based only on the trainer data, and I use that as features for my main model. So for that trainer model, it will use log loss, same thing, but the results are totally different from the main model. So the thing is that every time I retrain or modify the trainer model, I have to regenerate a data set for the main model to be trained on. So tweaking an underlying model is time consuming because I have to retrain the entire system in the end.
I've got an interesting one here. It's related to that question about how many markets you bet on. The question is, does your model often back market favorites? I would extend that to go, do you basically back the breadth of the market, or are there price areas that you're more or less likely to play in?
So when I started, I think with my first system, I was not laying at a price above 30, I think. And today is a bit higher than that. So actually you need to identify with your model what it's good at. So it cannot be good for all the prices, all the price bracket. So you need to find where your model is the most profitable and maybe focus on that price range and then tweak the model and expand to other price ranges.
That's a good answer. And I, working with a lot of people, I would say that's probably true of most models, that most have sweet spots, right? And knowing the strengths and weaknesses of your particular model and implementation really helps to improve your, efficacy, I guess.
Yeah.
Do you have a consideration too, whether you find particular races, classes, distances, or tracks are more consistent than others? So, for example, do you consider much of the race makeup rather than just the data and calculations, i.e., do you do better on metro tracks versus random we're out at Wangatui or wherever we might be racing tonight? Is it different, or is it just your model's pretty consistent, or just not what you've looked at?
The model is not consistent, so you get some states and tracks where the ROI is higher, which is good. I think comes from the quality of the data because it's very different from a state to another one. I think from memory in Victoria, the ROI is a bit higher for my model compared to other states. So yeah, quality of the data is quite important. Then the quality of the field being inconsistent, yes, absolutely. But that's mostly something you find with the grade. So maiden races, it's very hard to know what's going to happen. But it means also the market probably doesn't know either. So there are still betting opportunities here.
Do you manage your staking any differently if you know that it's, a maiden or something where you might not have the same advantage, or do you just, it comes out in the wash again?
Yeah, it's the same rule apply to all the different markets. No.
And another sort of staking one that plays into that. Do you have a percentage of your bank that you would consider a maximum outlay for a race? Again, that comes back to a slight more of a Kelly question, but at the same time, it talks to those variance trends. Does your stake size change based a little bit on how trends going, or are you just at a point in what you do that it's just consistent?
It is consistent actually. So the maximum exposure we'll have on the market will be the stake times the maximum price I will take a lay bet. And that will be for different markets. So if we have two races happening at the same time or before the market is reconciled, obviously it's adding up. So I can have quite a high exposure. Which actually was, yeah, which had been an issue when trying to place bets an hour or two before the race, because that's a lot of races in Greyhound at the same time, which was just using all my bankroll, which is not good.
So let's not consider exactors and how much that's going to chew up as and when we start betting in those.
Exactly.
That's a whole other bit of fun that you've got coming your way.
Yes. That's a program for later.
Yeah. I've got a couple of questions here on sort of bet timing. So just ballpark out from the off, when do you have most of your activities? Is it, you said a couple of hours before, is it there? Is it closer to, or is it a bit of both?
It's closer to the start time of the race at this
And
time.
is that partly because of that bank hold, that it's just does tie up a lot?
Mainly because of that, yes. Also, I compared the profitability of the model. If I place bets a few seconds before the jump time, as opposed to a few minutes before, and the profitability is pretty much the same. So it doesn't really matter.
It's not tying up as much of your,
exactly, yeah.
So unless they can go wrong.
Yes.
Unfortunately, but reality. Have you considered staggering your bets on a race, or do they all go on and give or take more or less the same time? I.e., are you going in once, or are you going in multiple times?
It's all going at once.
Yep. That's a fair answer. A very technical one. I'm trying to get through this before we get to the end, so that's why I'm rushing. Light GBM versus deep learning. Do you have a preference?
Yes. Actually, so I'm working on a few articles in that space, and I will share some code later this year with examples of using like GBM, XGBoost, logistic regression, as opposed to Keras TensorFlow, and compare results as well. So there is more to come later.
So watch this space.
Oh, yes.
I'm very excited about this. You don't use BSP at all, do you? You purely pre-play, is that fair?
I use it to backtest my models.
But for actual betting?
Not the actual price, no.
Yeah. No,
so not the live odds when generate my probabilities, no.
Oh, no, not in your testing. Are you betting BSP?
Oh, no, I don't, sorry.
No.
It's only exchange,
I didn't think so.
yes.
Yeah. Right, I'm nearly here. We had a couple of people asking about empty box, but you addressed that. I think this is probably our last question. What is a good performance metric and threshold value for your Australian Greyhound model?
So the strike rate is quite important. Somewhere around 41% is a good model, maybe a very good model. When I started, so back in the days with my first system, I think the strike rate was at 32%. And I was quite happy with that. And today is around 41, 42%. So it's a massive improvement. But the system that I was using back in the days is definitely not profitable anymore.
They change, right? The markets change. And
yeah, completely, yes.
If anyone has other questions for you, I mean, you're always incredibly open. I'm very grateful to that, and I know the community is really grateful as well. But are people able to like chuck them in the meetups channel on Slack and sort of ask them there?
Yes, absolutely.
And last question, because this one makes me chuckle. Do you actually watch any Greyhound races?
Very good question. So when I started doing stuff on the Greyhounds, I never had been to the dogs before. And thanks to Betfair, I've been invited, I think, 3 times to the dogs in 10 years. So I did actually watch a few Greyhound races. But yeah, over the last 10 years, I watched quite a few replays to understand how it works.
But definitely not a Greyhound fan of old, right?
Not initially, but yeah, it comes over time.
I absolutely love it. You crack me up. Thank you so much. I'm going to wrap this up because I do try and keep these to an hour. But thank you. I know that
You're welcome.
yeah, you've shared a lot, and I really appreciate that. And I know that the guys really do as well. So thank you for the time, for the preparation time as well. I was really blown away when I saw what you put together, but also for coming in and for being so open and for sharing. And I really appreciate that, particularly off the back of a road trip. So thank you.
Yes.
And I know we'll all really look forward to some of the content that you've got coming out in the next little while as well. So thank you so much. What I will say, guys, is, you know, like I said, hit Bruno, hit me up on Slack. We're always around. Let us know how we can help. Also, save the date. I was hoping I'd have an Eventbrite link for you, but I don't yet. But save the date, Wednesday, 18th August. Our next workshop is for spring racing, automated betting angles, with Tom Bishop. He's coming to talk about some different approaches that you can take to racing markets that might not take quite the same level of modelling skills that Bruno is talking about here. So save the date, keep an eye on it. We'll share that invitation soon in the community. Otherwise, thank you all for joining, for all the questions. Thank you, Bruno, for the answers, and to Ben for facilitating the evening. Makes my life so much easier. Have a great night, guys. Please stay safe around the country, and hope to see you all online or in person soon. Have a good one, guys. Bye.